This is the read-along for Part 1 of Unit 3.05, Impressionism 1. Lesson Introduction, Impressionism 1. Impressionist painters broke new ground by forsaking realist traditions. Rather than attempting to capture an accurate representation of a scene, French artists Claude Monet and Auguste Renoir painted impressionistic visions of outdoor life that caught the luminous effect of sunlight on objects. So, what this is saying is that the Impressionists came up with a new way of creating art by forsaking or giving up realist traditions. So they're giving up the old traditional way of doing things and they're coming up with their new way of doing things, which is to create impressionistic visions of outdoor life that caught the luminous effect of sunlight on objects. So their paintings are outdoors and have everything to do with sunlight on objects. There's some examples here. Be sure and click through these whenever you're going through your content on your own. And be sure and download the student guide PDF on this page 2 of the lesson introduction for Impressionism 1. The Art of the Impressionists. As you read through the lesson, use the student guide to take notes about each screen. You may also make quick sketches of the images to go with your notes. Explore the art of the Impressionists, redefining the world of art. The 1800s not only launched the Industrial Age, but also brought an end to many long-standing artistic customs. This century saw the invention of new media and the emergence of radically innovative techniques. So we're still in the 1800s and the Industrial Age, around the Industrial Revolution, which brought an end to many long-standing artistic customs, so ways of making art that had been around for a long time. This century saw the invention of new media, meaning things like newspapers, and the emergence of radically innovative techniques, so really creative new ways of doing things. In the more egalitarian societies of 19th century Europe, painters and sculptors found that they could no longer rely on the church or the aristocracy for patronage. In fact, the whole commission system, whereby an artist in effect has sold a piece before it was even begun, was now no longer the rule. Private galleries and public museums developed into major patrons and purchasers of artworks. So, egalitarian means more equal. So the more egalitarian societies of 19th century Europe in the 1800s, painters and sculptors found that they could no longer rely on the church or the aristocracy for patronage. Patronage means when somebody buys your artwork. And painters, artists used to have patrons who would regularly buy their artwork. So if you're an artist and you have a patron, you know that whenever you make that work, your patron is going to pay you for it. A lot of the time, the patron would tell the artist what specifically they wanted an artwork of. So you would say, I want a painting of a scene from this novel that's my favorite, and you would pay the artist to create that painting. So artists used to have very stable careers doing this. And now, when we're in the more egalitarian society, so things in Europe are becoming more equal, it's less about really wealthy churches or aristocracy. Aristocracy is like royal or noble families. So it's less about wealthy churches and wealthy members of the aristocracy sponsoring artists, and now things are becoming more equal. People are becoming more equal, and there's just not the same patronage that there used to be. So The commission system, whereby an artist in effect had sold a piece before it was even begun, meaning the patron tells the artist, I want this painting, here's the money, you can paint it, was now no longer the rule. Private galleries and public museums developed into major patrons and purchasers of artwork. So instead of the church and royalty and nobility, we have private galleries and public museums buying artwork. Meanwhile, as photographers began lugging their boxy cameras into the wild to record the natural world, painters were also freed from the confines of their studios by the development of oil paint in a portable tube. But some French artists did not aim for photographic realism in their landscapes. Rather, they sought to record their impression of a scene. The art world had never seen anything like it. So, like we discussed in Unit 3.02, photographers started taking photographs, and that left artists to become more creative in the way they did their paintings. So, around the same time, we also came up with oil paint in a portable tube. So artists could take these tubes of paint and they could go outside and they could travel to a location that they wanted to paint. So all of these things are coming together. We no longer feel pressure to make realistic artwork. We no longer have to stay inside our studio. We can go outside and paint because we have portable oil paint. And those things coming together meant that some French artists did not aim for photographic realism in their landscapes, meaning they didn't go out and try to paint what they saw perfectly like a photo. Instead, they sought to record their impression of a scene. So, like, whenever they look at it, what's their sort of impression? How does it feel? How does this scene kind of leave an impression on my mind rather than what exactly does it look like? And the art world had never seen anything like it. It was new. The art of the Impressionists. The French Impressionists. A group of young artists in France developed a style that would change the course of art. They organized their first group exhibition in 1874 after many of them had their work turned down by the jury that chose the work for display in the annual salon organized by the French Academy of Art. In the artist's private exhibition, Claude Monet displayed a painting of the morning sun rising over a harbor called Impression Sunrise. A critic at the show complained that Monet's paintings looked messy and unfinished and used the term impressionism to describe their sketch-like appearance. What the critic meant as a criticism instead became the group's name, the Impressionists. The term reflected the group's attempts to capture a fleeting moment in time while painting outside and directly from nature. So we've got these young artists in France that in 1874 took their paintings that they had been making and submitted them to an art show called the Salon. The Salon was organized by the French Academy of Art. So this is like the art world officials. And they decide what gets hung up on the walls and who's good enough for everybody to come see. And they turned down the Impressionist paintings. One of these guys, Claude Monet, displayed a painting of a morning sun rising over a harbor called Impression Sunrise. So it's his impression of the sun coming up over the harbor. And this was displayed after these guys were turned down for the salon. They said, you know what, we're going to have our own art show and we're going to show whatever we want. And in that show was this painting. And a critic, an art critic, came to the show to look and see what these guys were doing. And he complained that these paintings were messy and unfinished and sketchy, and said that it's like impressionism because it's just an impression. It's not a fully realized, a fully completed piece of art. It's just a brief impression. And what the critic meant to be a criticism, so a negative thing, became the group's name. So all of those guys were like, hey, that's a good term for us. We're the Impressionists. The term reflected the group's attempts to capture a fleeting moment in time while painting outside and directly from nature. So these guys were trying to paint brief moments when they're outside and they're looking out, and they're not painting from a photo, they're not painting from a drawing, they're looking out at what they see, and they're trying to paint that exact moment. Technology's influence on art. The 19th century witnessed two inventions, paint in tubes and photography, that influenced the Impressionists. Whereas some artists used photographs as an aid to make realistic paintings, the Impressionists abandoned such naturalist representation. Like the camera, which is immediately able to record the exact likeness of a scene, Impressionists wanted to be able to capture their perception of a specific moment and scene. They quickly worked to record their impressions before the lighting or weather changed, thus changing the colors of a scene. Even Renaissance artist Leonardo da Vinci noted that a person walking through a field on a sunny day takes on a slight green cast from light reflecting off the vegetation. Explore changing light and weather activity on the next screen to view this concept. So we've got paint in tubes and photography, which we've talked about, that influenced the Impressionist artists. Some artists use photos as an aid to make realistic paintings. So they would take a photo and then take the photo back to their studio and try to make a painting that looked exactly like that photo. The Impressionists abandoned this naturalist representation, so trying to make everything look just like it really looks in real life. Like the camera, which is immediately able to record the exact likeness of the scene, Impressionists wanted to be able to capture their perception of a specific moment in time. So a camera, you press a button and the photo immediately is captured. Impressionists wanted to do that, but instead of making it look realistic, they wanted to have a snapshot of just their impression. So if you go out and stand with your eyes closed and then open them for a second and then close them again, what was that impression that sort of left from just that moment that you saw that scene? They quickly worked to record their impressions before the lighting or weather changed. So the lighting is always changing. Think about it. The sun is moving through the sky during the day. Clouds are going back and forth. Shadows move. So because the lighting is always changing, they had to work really fast to capture that scene. And even Da Vinci noticed that if you're walking through a field on a sunny day, you'll look a little bit green because of the light reflecting off of all the grass. So the invention of oil paint in tubes enabled the Impressionists to leave their studios and begin to paint outdoors. Before, artists had ground their own mineral pigments and mixed them with oil. Now artists could take their tubes of paint anywhere and work directly from life. These new synthetic paints also came in vivid blues, greens, and yellows, hues that some artists were unable to create in their studios and had never used before. So this oil paint in tubes thing was a really big, powerful invention. The artists had never had anything like that before. They used to have to take minerals, meaning rocks, basically, and grind them up in their studio. So they have to grind them down into a fine powder and then mix them with oil, and that was what they painted with. And now they had paint that was already mixed. They had synthetic paint, meaning man-made. It wasn't ground down from rocks in nature. And they had vivid blues, greens, and yellows that some artists were never able to have before because they couldn't make that in their own studio. So these were big, big, important inventions.